So give a big round of applause to Thorsten.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. Hello to those on the screen in front of the computers. I always wanted to say something like that. Feels like a moderator. I'd like to talk about space and time. And if you're having a good time, and if you're having a very good time tonight, and you're forgetting everything about my contribution, these are the two words that I'd like you to remember. Space and time. And I want to challenge us to expand our definition of sustainability with space and time. Because only then will we succeed in our quest for excellence. Let me explain you why. We have a common general understanding of what sustainability is all about. We have planet, people, profit. We know that we must meet our current needs without compromising the needs of future generations. We talk about the three pillars, the three dimensions, or my personal favorite, the triple helix. Because we don't have different pillars. We don't have dimensions. It's all interlinked. So why is it important that we then talk about space and time? Let's look at ourselves. We are all different in how we implement sustainability. We all have hopefully offset the carbon coming over here. Some of you may shop for organic food. Others may prefer local food. We have people, as we have heard, who try to get their shopping bag with them to the shop every time they go and forget them half the time. And then they feel angry at themselves if they notice that they have showered for 20 minutes. But what we have in common is that we all employ certain strategies to consume sustainably. But is sustainable, is it an absolute concept? Is it a finite concept? Or is it a local concept? A local concept that needs to be adapted, that evolves. If we talk about consumption, let's look at her. A Bangladeshi textile worker. Assume she is a single mother of 3 kids. Does she consume responsibly? Does she buy organic coffee? Probably not. Should we ask her to change? Can she change? If we look at statistics, we have found out that the average person in Denmark has a footprint 15 times larger than the average person in Bangladesh. So it's up to us to change. We need to change. We understand that she's living in a different space, under different conditions, in a different location, but it's us who have to change something. But in order to consume more responsible, we actually need production to be responsible. So, wood is the most sustainable material available. Forests are fantastic. 80% of terrestrial biodiversity lives in forests. Forest supports the livelihoods of 1 out of 5 people on this planet. So all over you, right, you live from the forest. Imagine that. But the products they produce, the timber, is so superior to anything else that we have, it's unbelievable. Compared to plastics, to aluminum, to steel, nothing compares to timber. But we need to manage our forests sustainably. Luckily, in Europe, we do. 80% of the forests in Europe are certified. Most of them to PEFC, to the organization I work for. We work mainly with small forest owners, and there are about 15 million of them in Europe. But let's go outside of Europe, a different space, Vietnam. In Vietnam, 30 million people depend on forests for their livelihoods, an unimaginable number. Do you think they manage their forests sustainably? They don't. They usually have a harvesting cycle of 6 years. After 6 years, they cut down the trees. That is not only a problem when it comes to biodiversity, but it's also an economic problem. If they were just able to leave the tree standing for another 3 to 4 years, the overall income they would derive from that would be much, much higher. But do they have a choice? Surviving from the forests? If you were to organize a conference in Vietnam, what would you do? Exclude locally produced timber, or timber in general, because it can't be sourced sustainably from Vietnam? Is that the right choice? Depriving those people of their income? We have to understand the space in which they're operating to make the right decision. Let's look at plantations. Who thinks that plantations are great to get timber? Either you're, excellent. You have relatives in New Zealand or Australia? Because in New Zealand or Australia, people want timber from plantations. What's wrong? Why do they want that? Different space, different expectations. They may have a point because 60% of all the timber that comes out of Brazil is produced on 2% of the forest area in Brazil. Plantations. Yes, there are lots of other problems with plantations, chemicals, water use, biodiversity, but it's a different space, different expectations. We need to talk about what the best solutions are. But it's not only a question of space, but also a question of time. We know that most of us are a bit older, above 25. We have found that out during the day. So where's the source and the origin that we think defines sustainability? Many of us will say, yep, the Brundtland report, that was a definition that I remember. Others may say, no, actually it was the Club of Rome back in 1972, right? Limits to growth. And if you have any Americans here, they would probably point to Silent Spring, which was the birth of the environmental movement in the US in 1962. But the concept of sustainability is much older. And it actually originated in the deep forest of Saxony in Germany. It was a forester. It was I forgot the name. Sorry about that. Karl Hans von Karlowitz, exactly. That was his name. And what he said is, for every tree planted, harvested, we need to plant a tree. Only then is forest management sustainable, or nachhaltig in German. So that was his definition of sustainability in forest management, which is a concept that now applies to everything else as well. So that was 301 years ago. That's very different from how we understand forest management today. If you're today a forest manager, you have to comply with more than 250 criteria in order to be considered sustainable in your management practices. But even those criteria and indicators change. Forest fires. Are forest fires sustainable? The Americans invented back in the Second World War Smokey the Bear. And if you ever have gone to a forest in the US, you will have seen Smokey the Bear. They invented him to prevent forest fires because timber was an important resource material for the war. Nowadays, we think that Smokey the Bear must have done too good a job. Forest fires are now considered part of the natural cycle. They're important in management. Forest fires burn down overgrowth, dead leaves, fuel for potential future more dramatic forest fires. But beyond that, forest fires are important for ecosystems. In some ecosystems, they increase biodiversity. So today we have controlled burning in forests as part of sustainable forest management practices. It's a learning, it's an evolution over time that we have to consider. And this evolution will continue. I don't know what sustainability or sustainable forest management will look like for the Olympics in 2096, but I suspect it will be quite different from what we think today. But it's not only a question of evolution over time, it's also a question of timeline and what timeline a person or country is on. There are countries who would argue that deforestation is sustainable. Makes us wonder, how can that be? It's actually Malaysia. among others. Malaysia has cut down 10% of its forests in the past 20 years. What's sustainable about that? They were actually pretty open about that. They said, we need to do that. Why did they do that? They converted all this forest land to palm oil plantations. Palm oil plantations are economically much more viable than timber. Malaysia's intent was to lift people out of poverty, to create sustainable livelihoods, especially in rural areas. Okay, fantastic. Economic pillar, social pillar, but what about the environment? Well, Malaysia at the same time declared they would leave 50% of its total land area forested. Today, they're actually still standing at around 60%. Denmark? Does anybody know how much forest Denmark has? 11. If you take the average of Europe, then you, of course, also have Finland and Sweden and other heavily forested countries, then you're at 35%. Far away from the 50% that Malaysia promises. Malaysia's problem is that they're on a different timeline. While we have developed our land area and try now to sustainably develop our land area further over the past 100, 150 years, or in the case of the UK, past 1,000 years, Malaysia has only recently started to do that. Well, we don't want the Malaysians to cut down more forests than they need to. We need those 50% of the forests. They are really, really important for global sustainability. But how do we actually decide what's sustainable for Malaysia? And who decides that in connection with sustainability globally? How do we make the link between our intellectual understanding of what sustainability is with the realities on the ground in Sochi, in Qatar, today? We need to understand the concepts of time and space. And the best way to do that is actually through dialogue, such as here. We need to dialogue, we need to talk. Fantastic, right? Those tools exist. And I'm not talking about some high-level UN conferences where none of us would get entry. Well, actually, we met in Poland, I think, in Poznan. But I'm actually talking about a different tool where dialogue takes place, a tool that you all are using in your work, certification. It's a practical tool that you're using and you think all it does is give you evidence for sustainable forest management. But actually it does much more than that. It's a dialogue behind that. We are working, for example, with the forest owners in Vietnam to understand the space that they're coming from, to get them to understand where we are coming from, and to ensure that these spaces are met. We are working with them to enable forest management, to enable them to practice it. We are working with them so that they can design a forest management standard for Vietnam that is relevant to them, that meets their needs, while at the same point in time meeting our needs. That's what dialogue is all about, understanding the different dimensions. And I want to challenge you. We have gone through this process for 15 years. There's nothing magical about that. It's not difficult. And I want to challenge you to consider space and time when you are planning your conferences. I've read by now quite a few of those sustainable conference event management toolkits, lots of fantastic criteria. The thing that they don't touch upon, or just slightly on the side, is does that fit into the local context? If you have a conference in Finland, the Finnish, I'm told, are breathing and drinking and living forests. Forests are an important part of Finnish culture. Does it make sense, for example, to go to the uncertified wooden conference venue instead of the certified venue? Because this uncertified wooden venue actually is part of the Finnish culture. But there's more that you can do. If you go to, say, New Zealand, you want to have fish, certified fish. What springs to your mind? MSC certified fish. Fantastic idea. It excludes all the local fisheries, or most of them, from actually providing you with fish because they are all certified to a lesser known system called Friends of the Sea. That is lesser known doesn't mean that it's any worth, it's just lesser known. Among the two first certification systems, PEFC is a lesser known one because we spend potentially most of the time talking with foresters and not enough time at meetings like this. If you go to Vietnam to solve the challenge of whether you procure local wood even if it's unsustainable, I actually don't know what you want to do and what's the best choice for you. But I challenge you, consider space and time when thinking sustainability, because only then will you succeed in your quest for excellence. Thank you.